So I'm going to be totally honest with you right now. Sometimes van life is really hard. You have to deal with changing plans, inclement weather, figuring out where your next campsite is, where you're going to find groceries and water, and lots of driving and lack of routine, etc. It really can be exhausting. Sometimes even I need a break from van life, and I often do that in the form of house sitting or staying with family members. But really, there can become a time in life when you just are tired of nomadic living and you need a permanent break. That's what this episode of the Wayward Home podcast is all about. I chat with Joe and Kait Russo about their decision to buy a home with property and have a home base after 6 years on the road. We'll chat about what prompted them to make this move, what they love about home life, and what traveling in their camper van looks like now. Let's go.
Welcome to the Wayward Home Podcast, all about van life, boat life, and nomadic living. We'll bring you tips, interviews, and stories from the road and on the water. Now, here's your host, Kristen Haynes.
Hey there, I'm Kristen Haynes with thewaywardhome.com, and I spend half the year in my camper van and half on my sailboat in Mexico. I hope to inspire you to live nomadically too. So nomadic living is incredibly exciting. You have so much freedom, adventure, and flexibility. It's just mind-blowing compared to the normal sticks and bricks lifestyle. But no matter how much you might like roaming around in your camper van, RV, or sailboat, there might come a time when a home base starts to sound really nice. A home base is a great place to establish a routine, to take a break from life on the road, to cultivate community, many of the things that are harder to find when you're moving around constantly as a nomad. Well, this episode of the Wayward Home Podcast with Joe and Kait Russo of We're the Russos is really interesting. We chat about their life on the road and what made them decide to stop traveling full time. Let's get into it. Yeah, so first of all, I wanted to go way back to the beginning with you guys before we get into like the home base part of the podcast, but you were nomads for so long, and I just wanted to talk about like how that started, how you started. So let's just go way back and discuss that first.
Okay, so going way back, that'll take us to 2015. So that's when we decided to hit the road full time. And at the time, before we even hit the road, we both had corporate jobs. We had a dog. We were living in Southern California. So it was a big step for us to decide, hey, let's just make a huge change in our life, quit our jobs, sell most of our stuff, and just pack everything and become nomads. And at the time, our idea was we got this RV. We were going to travel around the country for a year and figure out where we would settle down at the end of that year. And that year quickly turned into 6.5 years before we decided to settle back down and have a home base and travel part-time.
So you guys traveled around for 6 years and you had a variety of rigs, and I wanted to go over all those different rigs because you have quite a lot of experience with all these different kinds of vehicles. So what did you guys live in?
Let's see. We started with a 30-foot Class A. That was for about a year and a half. Then we moved into a Class B van on a ProMaster chassis. So that was 2 years. From there, we spent a year testing out different rigs. So we might spend a couple weeks or a couple months in a rig at a time, and we're just kind of playing around with some different things. And then we decided on a truck camper, pop-up truck camper. Did that for 2 years. And then at the end of those 2 years is when we decided to stop full-time travel and get the home base. And then once we got the home base, we got another Class B van.
Very cool. And I think that there's some interesting adjustments that go with both, the launch into nomad life and then the launch back into house life, or having a property at least. But first of all, I wanted to touch on some of those changes that happen to us when we start the nomad life. And if you guys wanted to talk about like how that was for you in the beginning and maybe how that evolved over time as you got more adjusted to it.
I would say there was a huge adjustment for both of us, me more so than Kait, in that Kait is much more able to downsize. I not so much. And I remember when we had our Class A and we were in the process of selling the house and moving everything out of the house into the Class A and trying to figure out what we keep and what we don't keep. Every little nook and cranny of space in that Class A, we were putting stuff in, or at least I was. Like I would have stuff in reserve so that when we packed the Class A, if there was room, the stuff in reserve was coming with us. And it got to a point where about 6 to 8 months in, we sat down and we kind of did spring cleaning, and we started getting rid of all this stuff that we're like, why did we bring this? No reason to have it. Started getting rid of those things and realizing we had a lot of empty room in the Class A. And that's kind of what got us to the point of realizing we could potentially downsize to a Class B. Well, all of that going through that whole mental process for us was a lot of it was a big exercise for us in realizing that we could do with a lot less than we thought we needed to, at least when we first got on the road. And now we're back in a house and we're back in the mentality of getting more things. And
Well, yes, because you have definitely a different relationship with things
Mhm.
than I do. But I also think one of the biggest challenges that we also faced early on when we transitioned to this nomadic lifestyle was because we were on the move all the time. You were worried about where do we spend the next night? Where are we headed next?
Mhm.
And planning and getting into that routine
Yeah.
because it was something so foreign to us. This idea of traveling and being able to go wherever we want to go. And then I think we got in a really good groove. And now, surprisingly, we're really enjoying only traveling part time and enjoy being stationary
Mhm.
for a solid amount of time.
Yeah. And it was also interesting too, I think along with that was since we were moving and we were always going someplace new, I was feeling a lack of community. So all the community we had in Southern California was now gone. And we were going to all these new places. We didn't know people. There were a couple of times I told Kate, can we just like go to a bar or something so we can be around other people?
Yeah.
And all of that was lacking. But over the years, as we've gotten to know people, we've reconnected with a lot of friends. And now when we travel cross country, we'll make it a point if we have the time to stop in, spend a night or two with people in their driveway, visit, and really engage in that community that's gone from, it went from like this little bubble in Southern California to the entire nation.
And beyond.
Yep.
Yeah. In those 6.5 years where we travel full time, we uh, RV'd, so took a camper and explored 49 of 50 US states, several Canadian provinces. We went down to Baja, Mexico, and then also parked our camper for a month at a time and traveled internationally.
Mhm.
So now there's this huge community, as you say, all over the place.
Totally. And that's a wonderful thing about it. I've noticed that especially with the sailing side of nomad life is they're, you find sailors in certain areas and you just are friends with them forever. Like there's that instant bond, which is kind of neat about nomadic living. But it is very uprooting experience and to be constantly, on the move, I think has its own set of challenges. I know sometimes I crave just being, stopping and being in a house a little bit. And I'm wondering if when you guys were full time, did you sometimes feel that need? Like to stop and to maybe live somewhere? And how did you deal with that while you were nomads?
I don't know if we ever got the feeling. The only time so there were a couple times where we were in between rigs and we would end up at my mother's house for an extended period of time. It wasn't something we necessarily wanted to do. It was something we needed to do because of the fact that we didn't have another vehicle or other way of getting around. So in between RVs, we would have to pause for a little bit. The only time we specifically came off the road was at the outset of the pandemic in 2020, when things started to really get bad and the nation was kind of unsure about where things were going and what was happening. And what we were finding is that a lot of the services that we used as nomads, like showers and gyms and those types of things, water fill up, a lot of that stuff was closing. We didn't know when it was going to reopen. There was also talk that they were going to shut down the interstates, like state to state travel. So we decided to pick a place and just hunker down for a month. So we got an Airbnb, hunkered down for a month, got work done, enjoyed our kind of time off the road. That was really the only time.
I mean, I would say when we were traveling full time, there were times where, since we travel and work at the same time, we would take a little pause and maybe decide, hey, we're going to pick this spot and camp here for X number of days, catch up on work, kind of do laundry, right? All those things. And then we'll start traveling again. But those were at very short spurts amount of
Hmm.
time where we would kind of stay put for a few days. And
Yeah.
that would,
I would say at any given time when we were on the road, it was an anomaly if we stayed someplace more than 5 days.
Yeah, that sounds kind of like us, but we have had, house sitting stints, throughout and being able to, like, live in San Francisco for a month at a time, so we've had that kind of step back, and sometimes that's nice just to have a reset, catch up on work button, but, yeah, so I'm also curious, like, what led you guys into that decision to go back into the house when you were living in the truck camper at the time when you came upon that decision?
Well, we've always been, ever since we hit the road, we wanted to get out of Southern California. And part of that initial year travel was to travel the country and see where we wanted to settle down again. So something that was always in the back of our heads. But the pandemic and what us having to take a month off the road to kind of reevaluate and see where things were was also, I think, the impetus to say, hey, it might be a good idea for us to have a home base in case things got worse or something else happened, or we got sick or injured and needed a place to really hunker down and we wouldn't be able to go to our parents' house. So that got the ball rolling.
yeah. And there were, so when the pandemic first started and the lockdown began, like Joe said, a lot of services became unavailable, but even the Airbnb rental that we got, we later found out a lot of Airbnb rentals were shutting down as well.
Mhm.
And it just made us realize, well, while we could potentially find some long-term rentals, it seemed like it was a challenge at the time and we couldn't go to our families. Uh, they weren't comfortable with us coming into their house and we didn't want to live with them and still be out. So that made us realize we really needed a place that we could kind of call our own to use as a base that we can go to should something like this happen again, or if it continues on for much longer than we anticipate.
Yeah. And then the other part of that was we had planned in 2020, we'd actually planned on doing Alaska, which is the last state we haven't been to, as well as taking our camper and shipping it overseas potentially. Well, with the pandemic, getting up to Alaska through Canada wasn't an option for us, as well as going overseas. So we'd seen the lower 48 and spent a lot of time going through it. We hit up a few places we hadn't been yet, but at the same time, it's kind of like, all right, we've done this. And now we're just kind of traveling to travel, moving to move. With the truck camper, it's not the type of setup where you want to go and spend a month just living out of that. So that really kind of pushed us again to get serious about buying the house. And we did a whole series the summer of 2021. We took a camper and took my mother for almost 10 weeks around the country, coast to coast, 11,000 miles. And the decision that we made was we have to dedicate an entire summer to this. So we will do that. And then after this is done, we're going to start shopping in earnest.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned 2020 because I think a lot of nomads started to feel very vulnerable during that time. Because I remember we did too. We couldn't find water, and it was just such a scary feeling to not have your own resources available. And we actually started looking at property at that time. And I think a lot of nomads I talked to were also looking at property because we just felt like everything's suddenly unavailable, and that's a very scary feeling, So it's interesting you also went through that during that time. So
Was there a
yeah.
point you all were kind of searching? Because you haven't, you didn't end up with a property or a home base. Was there a specific turning point where you decided, oh, I'm comfortable to keep going?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that had to do with having our sailboat too in Mexico and that being a place where we could go because the Mexico border we learned was open and we could go down to our boat. And so we kind of isolated on the boat that way. And so at that point we were like, yeah, we have our little escape pod south of the border. So that's the point where we decided not to get the property. But it's definitely still something on the back of my mind regularly. And like you guys traveled around the US to see where you wanted to be. And that's always in the back of my mind. Like, where would I want a property? Where would I want a place to settle? Because it is nice to have somewhere to go and like do a garden or do whatever you want to do with that property that you can't do in the van.
Mm.
So what was it like when you guys like found that property and did that transition from the full-time travel into the, more stationary lifestyle?
It was a little strange because we were used to having the room especially when we go and, like I mentioned, have those times off in between campers and spend at my mom's house or something like that. But we didn't, outside of what was in our camper, and some of the stuff we put aside in boxes, we didn't have anything for a house. I mean, we had a couple spoons and utensils and things that were in the camper. Each of us had a bowl. We didn't have any furniture whatsoever to speak of. And having to go through that whole process again. And luckily, the house we bought, the previous owners, we met them during the walkthrough at one point, and they asked us if there was anything that if they were throwing away that we would want them to keep. And we said, anything you're planning on throwing away, just leave because we have nothing. So we got a couple pieces of furniture, table, things like that. And then Kate's parents were generous enough to give us some furniture that they weren't using anymore. We've slowly been buying and getting things, but it's been almost 2 years now, and still our house is, I wouldn't even say halfway furnished.
It's fairly empty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a
Um,
weird thing to have to start from scratch, you know? I think about that too, like, oh my God, I have to buy so much furniture if I ever get a house. It's overwhelming.
Yeah. And I remember when we were selling our house in Southern California, both of us said, hey, let's just get rid of all this stuff because let's not bother with a storage unit or anything because we can always buy it again. Having gone through that whole process, and if I went back to talk to old me, I would seriously consider trying to talk myself into getting a storage unit.
Yeah.
At least
I
for
was
some.
I was wondering that too, because a lot of people do give everything up. And one of their common questions some people ask me is, should I store everything? And I think if you are planning on, settling down in the future, maybe it is a good idea to store stuff. At least you have your own furniture, to repopulate a house. So that's interesting that you went through that as well. So yeah. And aside from like having to refurnish the stuff, your house, you've also probably had to buy just, stuff. And I'm wondering, what was that like buying things? Because I know as nomads, we try not to buy things. So what was that whole experience like?
I'm still struggling with buying things. Uh, it's because having lived that nomadic lifestyle, you get in the mentality of like you just have what is essential, right? You really don't get very many nice to haves just to have because you don't have the room for it. But also getting out of that like consumerism frame of mind, right? You have it and it works. And I don't need all this extra stuff to be sitting around. I think a little bit of kind of the turning point maybe for me to say, oh, well, maybe we should get a few more things is when family come to visit. And we might not necessarily have comfortable places for them to sit and kind of thinking about them more. So it's for me, it's less about buying things for me to furnish the house. It's a little bit more about making it comfortable so that when our family are staying with us or friends visit, that they have a comfortable place.
Yeah, but the flip side of that too is we get this stuff and then she's really happy to have it because she has a comfortable place to sit. I think the mid ground for us is more um, not going out and buying things in excess that we're not going to use. So having a couch or something makes sense, but I still have just a towel. I don't have a whole set of towels like we used to. Now we have extra towels for guests, but I don't need more than one towel. It can get washed and then I can, use it again. It's one of those things where it's stuff like that, that living in a van, in a camper and realize you can do with one, of something and not having to go to excesses about all of that stuff.
But we did learn that we need to double up on certain things for our camper versus the house. So having an extra set of bedding and thing camper that just stays in the camper so that we're not constantly moving things in and out. Or if we end up driving the camper out to see family and we need to fly back to home base, we still have a set of sheets here,
Yeah.
not in the camper.
Yeah. We learned that very quickly because the first time we took the camper and left it somewhere and flew back, we got back and realized we don't have coffee making equipment. We don't have this. We don't have that. And all of a sudden we start ending up with a lot of Amazon boxes.
That's traumatizing to come home and not have coffee equipment. I'd probably freak out. But
That's
yeah. So you guys feel like you probably learned a lot on the road about stuff in general, and you've taken that to your now house life.
Now, I'm
Yeah.
curious, do you have separate things for your van versus your sailboat, or do you
You
just
know,
move things?
yeah, that's something I always think about, and we're getting to a point where we are trying to have more separate things, but there's definitely always a gigantic van of stuff we're driving across the border to the boat and unloading onto the boat, and then I forget what things I have on there versus the van, and I'm like, I just need to do what you guys do and just have boat stuff and have van stuff because it gets really overwhelming and you always forget or lose something. So, yeah, but it's challenging. It is a challenging mentality because in the van, before I buy something, I think about, do I really need that? And so it's always this process of purchasing that sometimes it holds me back from purchasing what I might really need. So it's always a struggle. But what was it? What are like when you started living in there versus traveling full time? What did you notice about it? Like, do you feel like you had more time for personal things, or what kinds of changes did you see in your lifestyle?
It's definitely easier to have a routine.
Yes.
I think because it's when I would try to have a routine in the van, there were days and times where we were supposed to wake up and get someplace, or we'd be on the road all day long. And it, aside from making coffee every morning, there's really no routine we could set. And I think that's been one thing that I've really enjoyed about having the house is being able to have that morning cup of coffee, get some work done, or do a Chinese lesson, stuff like that.
And when we started shopping for home base, we had a list of requirements that we were looking for and then some nice to haves. And one of the requirements for me was having enough land where there is nature, right? Because I love nature. And that was one of the reasons we started RVing when we loved boondocking in the national forest, going to all the beautiful national parks. So having kind of my daily access to nature makes it really enjoyable and calming and peaceful to be at home base. And it's nice to have a place that we really enjoy coming back to after we're traveling.
And what's interesting too about that is since we have our own forest and that when we go out now in the camper, we are more interested now in going into kind of like a city town environment where we can kind of mix it up there and less out in the middle of the forest because we have that at home. And it's kind of changed the way we travel and kind of the places we look at going to.
That's so interesting that you said that about the nature because sometimes when I stay in homes, like I was just at my sister's house for a week because we had a 100-degree heat wave here in Portland. So I had to go escape an AC, and her house is in like the tightest subdivision you can imagine. Like the next house is 15 feet away, and there's no nature. I mean, there's a view of the forest, but you can't go in the forest or really sit outside because the neighbor's looking at you. And I just started to feel like a trapped wild animal. And I'm like, I gotta go. Like I just started like feeling like a dog that needed a walk. It was a really weird feeling. But like you said, when you have a home and it has that nature, you have both. It's like a grounding experience. So that's cool that you guys needed that because I think we learned that as nomads that we need to be outside a lot. Yeah. And do you guys do a lot of things outside at your house? Like, are you doing gardening? Are you doing outdoor? Or do you just go like hang out outside?
I go for daily walks around the woods, which is really nice. And I've been learning, getting more into foraging. So being able to identify what's edible, what's not edible on the property. Last year, we harvested some amazing oyster mushrooms that grew on a tree that came down. That's definitely part of my routine now is I wake up and I go outside and go for a walk, visit with my trees and, see what changes are happening because we picked an area. Our home base gets 4 seasons, but they're wild.
Mm.
But it's also really nice to see the trees when they're changing colors in the fall and then all the leaves fall and learning how to identify these trees with and without their leaves.
And I get to do all the maintenance or most of it.
Fun.
So, it's now going out and getting chainsaws and pole saws and all this equipment. I have a commercial grade mower and all of these things and the hours spent working on the property.
Well, some of the trees on this property are, I would say, over 100 years old. So when they come down after a storm, it takes a while to chop it up and it
Wow.
relocated. It
Yeah.
turned into firewood.
Wow.
So we
That's
do,
amazing.
sitting out on the deck having a fire, feeling like we're in nature, but having access to all the comforts of a home.
Cool. Yeah, that's the best of both worlds, really, when you can have that property. And I'm sure when we get a property, it's going to have to be on land, like for sure. So I was wondering about like the cleaning aspect, because also I notice when I stay in a house, I get overwhelmed because I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so many rooms that I have to clean and organize and track my stuff. And what was that transition like for you guys?
Well, I tell myself one day at a time, one room at a time, right? So it doesn't get so overwhelming. And making that part of my routine. But I'm also the type of person who enjoys cleaning and organizing. So to me, it's not a chore. It's just a matter of like breaking it down into smaller tasks so that it doesn't feel overwhelming.
And I will say for me, having a house feels much cleaner than having a camper, because with the camper, especially a lot of the places we were going in the Southwest and that really fine dust that just gets everywhere and you can never get rid of it. It was just constant. Um, and the other thing I've gotten used to is getting back in the routine of taking a daily shower. And now when we go out, not taking a shower every day feels strange. Whereas before, taking a shower every day felt strange.
That's very true. That's an interesting adjustment. I always know that I love having endless hot water whenever I stay in a house, or like I could take a really long shower, it's not a problem. So that is
Or
it's amazing. Or a bath. That's the best thing. Something I definitely miss is the bath. But I feel like when we're nomads, these things become luxuries, where most people that live in homes their whole life take it kind of for granted. They're like, this is just what we have and this is what's
Mhm.
available. But when you're a nomad, you're like, wow, that's fancy. Like there's a dishwasher. So it's funny that now you guys are living the life of luxury and all these small things that we have in homes here in the US are just incredible, like what we have. So
yeah,
yeah, that's all an interesting transition.
Years of living full time on the road helped us kind of develop that list of things we were looking for in the home base that we found. And one of them is good water pressure, because so many times in the camper, you don't have great water pressure or you don't have unlimited hot water. So that was definitely a requirement for us.
yeah. And another requirement too was we wanted to be somewhere in the country that doesn't experience droughts and things like that. So, like my mother living in Southern California is dinged or, can get severely fined if she goes over a certain allotment of water and all these other things. And we didn't want to have to deal with that. So where we live, we can use as much water as we want. There's no irrigation because you don't need it. It rains all the time. It's nice. It's green. So
Cool. And did you guys pick a bathtub in your house?
Yeah.
yes.
Yes. That was definitely something I really enjoyed when we would visit with a friend or family and they would offer to let me take a bath. I love
I know. It's the
there's some
best.
statements like you say. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think
Totally.
another thing that a lot of people take for granted is the community and the things you have around. And I believe that for us, having lived this lifestyle, we would go into little towns and we would seek out all sorts of different unique things about that town. Kind of the history behind it, certain farmers or markets that were going on. I remember in New Mexico, we found this family that they do their own chilies and it's their own variety and everything. And we sought them out and found this stuff. So now that we have a home base, we're doing that same sort of exploration, but in our hometown or home area. And we found a lot of amazing things that even the locals here don't know about. And we've developed this community where, for example, there's a farmer not too far from here. Does all their own grass fed everything. So one season we got a whole hog and now we have the room for all of that meat and things. And it's just cool to have that again.
Yeah, that is something that we miss, and being able to do certain activities, like I know beforehand I really liked, taking horseback riding lessons or going or learning how to do dancing. That was big for me. And Tom, my partner, was like in a band. And when you're traveling, you just can't really do those things because you don't have that community and you're usually not in cities, so it's neat when you can stop and you just develop those, connections again and maybe pick up some hobbies you can't do when you're
Exactly.
so so you guys have really enjoyed that, it sounds like. So that's really cool. And how often do you now go out on the road now that you have a home? Is it like what percentage do you think you now go out on road trips?
I would say last year it was about 50%. We were traveling and then 50% at home base. And then this year we made the decision to try to spend more time at home base, especially in the summertime, to get a better feel of what the weather is like. And if we did want to grow vegetable garden next season, kind of have an idea of what that timing would look like.
Yeah. And I would say now this season, we've spent more time doing short trips.
Hmm.
So coming up, we have a trip up to Michigan and we're just going to be gone for the weekend. And it's nice to be able to do short trips like that. It's also nice to be able to configure the camper for that trip, so that we can take up, like we have this pizza oven we can take with us that we never would have had in full-time life because you just don't have the room to dedicate to something like that. So it's those types of things where despite we don't travel as much, but when we do, it's different in a lot of ways. And we can make more use out of our time.
But there are definitely challenges now. I've found with trying to travel while having a home base. For example, if there is an ice storm that's going to be rolling through, do we want to schedule our international travel for that time of year or that time? And what's going to happen to the home base because we don't have someone looking in on it.
Yeah. And it definitely makes it more difficult if we want to do travel on one of the coasts or, something further away from us because we're in the Midwest. So now we have to say, all right, if we want to go through Oregon or that, we now need to travel cross country to do that, plan to spend the time and or plan to leave the camper someplace where we fly home, do our stuff at home and then fly back to grab the camper. So there are challenges that we didn't have before. Before we could, if we were living on the road full time, we could say, hey, let's go spend summer in the Pacific Northwest. And we would drive out there. You slowly make your way out there. You slowly make your way through the Pacific Northwest and then slowly make your way somewhere else.
Right. But now you have that desire to like go home and to check on your home and like make sure things are okay over there. And that's probably why you fly back, right? When you're traveling.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yep. That is a big change to get used to as well. And then what you said before that you touched on was interesting that you like to go into cities a little more now and explore and park in cities. And what's that been like with the camper, like doing the city thing?
It's been fun
Mhm.
because we have a small Class B camper. It's under 20 feet. We can park essentially anywhere that a standard vehicle can park. So it gives us the freedom and flexibility to kind of go in and out of cities and explore that way.
I mean,
Really enjoyed it.
we even explore, what's local to us in the camper because we can go, we have the camper, especially if we're going out for the day and we really want to just spend the whole day out. Like if we go to Costco, we bring the camper, we put all the stuff that needs to go in a refrigerator or freezer in the refrigerator or freezer, and then we can do the rest of our errands and everything else. So it's fun that way.
And even
Yeah.
if we're just a friend locally, we can take our camper, still spend the night on their driveway if we're staying late.
Mhm.
Not want to make the 20-minute drive home and then wake up in the morning, spend more time with them, and then head home.
Yeah. Yeah. You got your little apartment on wheels and your little guest room, which is really handy when visiting people. I definitely agree with that. So looking back on your like time as nomads, did it feel like the right length of time? Like how did all that feel to you as nomads?
Um, I wouldn't say anything felt right. It just, we went with the flow. Whenever people asked us how long we were going to do it, we just said till we were ready to do something else.
Yes.
And
That's
we
what I
didn't, for me, I felt like we got to a point in that nomadic lifestyle where we got to a point where we were traveling to travel, meaning we were no longer going someplace to necessarily see it. We're going someplace because we lived on the road full time and we wanted a bit of a change of scenery. We wanted to keep going and do stuff. Um, and I think at that point we started to say to each other, okay, I think now is the time for something new, something different.
Yeah, I would say if the pandemic hadn't happened, we definitely would have gone to Alaska. Like we had planned and probably shipped our camper overseas. And that definitely changed the trajectory of where we were headed. And we still have plans to ship our camper overseas potentially or renting a camper overseas, which we tried doing that in Italy recently. So
And I will say based on that experience, at least for Europe, I have no interest anymore of shipping our camper over to Europe because it's so much nicer for at least for me, to go to every city and things via train and be able to kind of spend that time in the center of town rather than on the outskirts in a camper and have to go back and forth and everything else. I don't feel like you get the same culture and experience in a camper as you do if you're just on foot and you can pretty much go anywhere you want.
Yeah, very true. And like you said, you can always rent one. Like we're thinking of doing that as you go rent a camper for a couple weeks and then you can drop it off and then you can train into the city and stay in the city. And then you can have the best of both worlds without having your own rig to have to deal with and worry about that whole time.
Yeah.
So yeah. And I'm curious if you guys have any like advice for other people that are nomads and they're thinking of doing this. Like I know you created like a list or like how did you narrow down a home or just any advice in general you have for people?
Well, I think my first bit of advice for anyone who's rent a place for a little bit, let's say a couple of weeks or a month, see, if it gives you kind of what you're looking for that was driving you to get a home base. And maybe after the 2 weeks or a month, you're ready to get back on the road and just keep doing what you're doing. Sometimes we've met people, and that this happened to us too. You get a little burnt out as a nomad. And it's okay to just take a pause, settle down for a month, rent a place, regroup, and then keep
Mhm.
going. And maybe you won't even need that home base.
Yeah. And the way we ended up in this area for us, we're in Indiana. Excuse me. But we never had any intention of moving to Indiana.
I believe you said, I will never live in India.
Yeah, I went to school in Indiana. Excuse me. I went to school in Indiana, and yes, I said that. Um, for us, we had the opportunity to live anywhere in the country, and that made it extremely difficult for pinpointing where to look, because you could be looking at a place in Montana and a place in Florida, and there's no way you're going to be flying back and forth and all of these things, going to showings and things, especially in a competitive market. You need to be on the ground and you need to be in a spot where you want to live. So I think first and foremost, if you have made the decision that you want to kind of hunker down and get that home base again, figuring out where in the country and having a general idea. For us, how we ended up in Indiana was we were looking more in Alabama, more southern, and where we have friends up in Indiana. And during kind of looking at homes and other things, we would drive up to Indiana and visit with them and spend time on their driveway. And we just started to fall in love with the area we're in now. And the more time we'd come back up here and spend, the more we really enjoyed the area until our friends said, "Hey, I have a friend who's a realtor. I'm calling her up and you guys are looking at homes around here." And the rest is history. So for us, it was kind of serendipitous that we had friends and we were able to spend time here. Otherwise, we never would have considered it as a home base. But the other two was just that we had to pick an area to look. We were not able to house hunt the entire United States.
Yeah.
Picking a place for us where we had a good community in terms of friends that have lived here and grown up here is it gave us immediate access to resources that we would have had to figure out on our own. So, for example, we could easily call them and say, "Hey, do you have a good recommendation for a dentist?" Or, do you know a realtor in the area? Do you know someone who can do a roof inspection, stuff like that? Or just even, any kind of those resources and connections that you would need once you settle down.
Mhm.
It's nice to have that.
Yeah. And the other thing we found too, not so much in this area, but some other areas where we looked briefly, was that some of the smaller towns, you're now trying to break into a well-formed community and you become the outsider. And a lot of people are great at making new friends and kind of breaking those barriers. But what we found and heard in talking to locals is that process can actually be and especially if you need services or work done on your house. For example, we have friends who bought in the mountains of Colorado, and they're having a really tough time finding people to come out and have work done. And just being able to break into that community and find the people who are willing to trust you and come out and do the work for you and those sorts of things, rather than the friends or other people they know in the community already.
And sometimes that's due to picking a location where there's more people and fewer people to support all that in terms of services. And keeping that in mind too, if you pick an area, let's say that might not be able to have the service infrastructure to actually support all the people that live there.
Yeah, yeah, very true. And yeah, I do like what you mentioned about having the camper and you're able to just go to that part of the country and just sort of home base there out of your camper and make sure you like it. And so that's an important part too. So cool. So what are your guys's like upcoming plans like in your van? You said the Michigan one, but what else are you do you have anything else on the docket?
Let's see, Michigan trip. And then we're actually going to be very busy hosting a bunch of people. We've had like lots of people, friends who are nomads roll through in their camper and they'll spend a few days. They could do laundry, have a real shower. We offer them a guest bedroom if they want to take a break. So we'll be hosting quite a few nomads for a little bit. And then our next trip, Joe and I have gotten into cruising. So we've got another cruise coming up with family.
Oh,
Oh,
fun.
no, Chattanooga.
Oh, yeah. And we will be taking our camper to Chattanooga, Tennessee. That'll be
Oh,
fun.
fun. That's so cool that you guys can now provide that respite for nomads, because I know I'm always thankful for that when I'm traveling, when a friend is like, "Yeah, park in a driveway, use the shower, do laundry." It's always such a fun thing, and then you get a visit with them as well, so that's neat you're
Mhm.
able to, like, be on the other side of that and provide that support, and you have the land and property to host campers. So,
Mhm.
that's cool.
So
Are
if
you
you're
guys
in
gonna
New York,
Yeah, if I'm in Indiana, I'll come visit. Are you guys joining Boondockers Welcome or anything like that?
our schedule is so crazy.
Totally. I get that. You're still no you have that nomad at heart where you still love to travel, but you have the home. You have the best
Mhm.
of both worlds right now. So cool. Well, great. Is there anything else that you guys wanted to say to people about your lifestyle?
Joe?
No, I mean, I think it's everything we covered. It is something you're considering. Take the time, figure it out. Don't, I think the biggest lesson we learned was what I mentioned earlier about narrowing down your search, because that was actually something that was causing me a lot of stress, where we would look at a house and it would be really nice. And we were talking about, should we put a bid in on this house? And Kate or I would pull up our laptops and be like, well, this is in Nashville, but there's this really cool house in Montana.
Sure.
Yeah. And look at the price difference.
Uh,
And you just have to kind of pick a spot, narrow it down, focus on that, trust your instincts.
And we always kind of live by the motto of going with the flow, right? And you're never 100% locked into anything that you do. So even if you do pick a home base in an area for a while, doesn't mean you're going to be there forever. You always have option and the flexibility to pick another spot somewhere down the road. Or maybe
yeah.
you give up the home base and go back to nomadic lifestyle.
We have friends who settled down and they're both in the house now. And they, especially one of them, doesn't like it, doesn't like the home base, wants to be back out on the road. And there's no shame in saying, hey, we screwed up and we need to do something else.
Or we tried it and it's
No.
moving up.
Yeah. And that's the amazing thing is to be able to have that choice and that freedom, I think, to do what you want and change your mind. I mean, that's amazing.
And
So
I think as nomads too, for people who made that transition of, having a more traditional lifestyle and deciding to hit the road or travel full time, however you are wanting to do it, you've already made that huge shift and change. So I think it makes it a little bit easier, at least it did for us, to make that shift to having a home base and traveling part time. And it doesn't make me have any like fear or apprehension for what's to come of, hey, we can make another shift and do something else in a few years.
Yeah. And I
very
think
true.
Kate also brought up a good point earlier, which is a lot of us nomads, there are times where you get burnt out. And I think at least when we were starting, even some of the comments we got on YouTube when we might take a break or something, people would say, well, you're not real full timers. Well, if you live in a house full time and you take a vacation, do you not live in a house full time? Um, so don't feel like you have to be in this box of I'm a nomad, I'm full time, I'm always going to live out of a van. You can take a break, get an Airbnb, park the van or camper, whatever it is, take a month off and see if at the end of that month, you're really enjoying having that home base, or you're jonesing to get back out on the road and you're like, yeah, this home base thing isn't.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, you guys brought up so many good points, and I'm really excited to talk to you about that transition, and tell people like where to find you. You have really cool YouTube videos, but just yeah, tell everybody where to find you guys.
Okay, you give them the website, I'll grab the
Okay.
books.
We share resources about traveling and, camper lifestyle on our website, we're therussos.com. So it's WERTHERUSSOS.
I'll put links too.
And we also publish videos on YouTube, and we'll do some updates and things on Instagram as well as Facebook. And that's all at We're the Russos.
And for those of you who are interested in the transition we made from full-time house living into that Class A and everything we had to go through, the downsizing process, the purchase process, selling the house, I wrote a book all about that. It's Take Risks. Find it on Amazon or pretty much anywhere in digital format, but Amazon's the only place to get a physical copy. And then the first year and a half we spent on the road in the Class A, talking about boondocking, getting into that lifestyle, why we started the YouTube channel and the website and everything else. I have Tales from the Open Road, also available on Amazon and everywhere else. There you go.
Awesome. It sounds like you need another book in the works now.
There is one in the works. So I'm doing one all about the summer with mom.
Oh, very cool. I can't wait. Awesome. And then your email list, don't forget that. I love your email list. So how do people get on that? They go to your website?
Yep. Just go to our website and you can subscribe to our email list there.
Cool. Yeah, I love your update. So, yeah, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. It was always fun to chat with you guys, as always. Well, thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Wayward Home Podcast. I'd like to take a second and encourage you to join my email list. You can get direct access to me. I read and respond to all my emails, plus tips, stories, and advice for life on the road. To subscribe, just go to thewaywardhome.com/subscribe. That's thewaywardhome.com/subscribe. I'll see you over there.